Chapter 6, Part 2. So in the first video that I posted, we went over the introduction with introducing some of the different concepts. Then I talked about the puzzle of consciousness. So in this second video, we're going to look at circadian rhythms, our daily biological clocks, and we're going to look at sleep and dreaming. The slides will continue on and do sections 4 and 5, but I won't be doing a video for those at this time. I also wanted to sort of point out, a suggestion. This is how I studied and how I learn material is to break it into the different pieces like this, and break each of the sections of the chapter down and just pull out the main points. So anyways, I've set this up as an example of how I would go about it. I know there's a lot of information here and some of it's a little bit dense, so possibly that would be helpful for you. Okay, so let's start with circadian rhythms. In the section of circadian rhythms, there's keeping time, which is the brain and the environment, and then environmental disruptions of circadian rhythms. Okay, so first, keeping time, the brain and the environment. So what is circadian rhythms, or you would have heard of circadian clock, right? It's a 24-hour cycle in the physiological processes in human beings. It's a built-in mechanism, right? But it can also be affected by external stimuli. So as we go through this cycle over the course of the 24 hours, there's changes and fluctuations in body temperature, hormones, and other bodily functions. And all of these affect our mental alertness, and as we go back and forth between the states of wakefulness and sleep. This circadian rhythm is regulated by suprachiasmatic nuclei, which I'm going to call SCN from now on, which is the master clock in the brain. So the SCN neurons they're linked to the pineal gland, which secretes melatonin, which, as you know, it's a hormone that relaxes the body. Neurons in the SCN have a genetically programmed cycle of activity and inactivity, but also daylight and darkness helps to regulate this cycle. The optic nerve links our eyes to the SCN, and the SCN activity affects the pineal gland's secretion of melatonin. In turn, melatonin influences other brain systems governing alertness and sleepiness. Neurons in the SCN are active during daytime when it's bright out, and so them being active inhibits melatonin secretion and raises body temperature and alertness. At night, when it gets dark, the SCN allows melatonin secretion to increase, and melatonin promotes relaxation and sleepiness. In the text, they talk about a study to do with early birds and night owls. And what they're talking about there is morning people tend to go to bed earlier and rise earlier, whereas night people tend to stay up later and then sleep in later. And this is not news to you, I'm sure. So studies many studies have been done on this, and that morningness is more common among older adults, whereas people around the age from 18 to 30, they tend to be more night owls, so to say. In this study that they're showing here, basically showing that morning students, they measured the performance in class of morning students and evening students. So for students who registered in 8 a.m. classes, it shows that their grades were higher, like 3.25, say compared with evening students, like the night owls, who had more of a 2.75 grades. In the later classes in the day, Interesting, the morning students still performed better at almost 3.2, whereas the night owls performed less still at almost 3.1. Other studies have also found differences in terms of morning and night owls to do with location and also culture as it is temperature, because they found that university students in warmer weathered countries like Colombia, India, and Spain, they had greater morningness than students in, say, United States and Netherlands, where it's colder. So again, every 24 hours, our body temperature, like as we go through this cycle, our body temperature changes. There's fluctuations. There's certain hormonal secretions change, different levels, and other bodily functions undergo rhythmic changes. And these rhythmic changes, they affect our mental alertness and our, that should say, readiness. Oh, ready is our passage back and forth between the states of wakefulness and sleep. So this is the graph that's on page 198 of your text. And what it's really showing is the different levels of alertness, melatonin, and core body temperature. The text seems to be highlighting those three as important elements fluctuating in circadian rhythms. So you'll see, say, the first one, alertness, during the day is high, at night is low. Day is high, night is low. The second one, melatonin. Now, melatonin is what relaxes your body and helps you sleep. So during the day, your melatonin level is low, and at night, your melatonin level shoots up because it's helping you sleep. And then in the daytime, again, it's low, right? And then the top one, it's core body temperature. During the day, your body temperature is high. At night, it's low, right? Maybe, as you're lying there, that's why you need extra blankets and such. And then during the day, it shoots up and it's high again. It's a pretty simple chart once you sort of looked over that way, and it helps explain how things change. One environmental disruption of these rhythms is seasonal affective disorder. You may have heard of that probably, as we are in Canada, and that is prevalent here. SAD, it's a tendency to become psychologically depressed during certain months of the year. So that's most notably in the winter time. You'll see that it's higher, the prevalence is higher in North America than it is in Europe. But the prevalence of SAD, it tends to increase as you move more towards the northern countries where the hours of daylight are less in the late fall and in the winter. So, as many of you know, even now it gets dark at 6:30 p.m. and then it's dark until 7:30 in the morning. So we spend quite a lot of time in the dark during the winter months, and that's when the seasonal affective disorder really kicks in for a lot of people. So some of the stats that sort of support this is that the SAD rate in Alaska is 9.2%, which is quite high. In the Maritimes in Canada, 7.2%. Anybody want to guess? I guess you can't guess because we're doing a video. Orlando, Florida. Maybe take a guess what you think that might be in your head. Okay, that was found to be less than 2%. So this is one of the reasons why it is recommended, especially during the winter months, that you go outside. I know you've got a lot of studying to do and you're very busy, but the idea is that you study, but at least for perhaps 1 hour a day, you are outside in the sunlight, because that has been shown to have a positive effect on mood, and maybe ward off a little of this SAD that kicks in during the winter months. Another environmental disruption the text talks about is jet lag. I'm sure most of you have had that if you've ever been traveling around the world, so to say. It's a sudden circadian disruption caused by flying across several time zones in one day. Right? So as you fly east, you lose hours from the day, and as you fly west, the travel day becomes longer than 24 hours. Yeah, so one example would be I flew to India to see a friend of mine, and even after 24 hours, it was 24 hours door to door, and even after 24 hours, it was time for bed, and I was awake and ready to go 3 hours later at 2 o'clock in the morning. It felt like daytime to me, and it's 2 a.m. Yeah, so it usually takes a few days to straighten that out, get your circadian rhythm back in line, and then of course you have to correct it again when your vacation is over and you fly home. And lastly, in terms of environmental disruptions, the text talks about night shift work. So, night shift work is problematic because when people have to sleep during the day, they do not have the proper sleep quality. So, what happens is they become fatigued and stressed, and in general more accident prone, whether they're at work or whether at home. So the text talks about the most problematic circadian disruption for society is adjusting to an inverted night-day work schedule. Then they talk about the rotating shift work. So a forward rotating work schedule that takes advantage of this is called rotating shift work. Now I don't find the text was overly clear about what they meant by that, but rotating shift work would mean that, say, for example, one shift would be 3 to 11, another shift would be 11 to 7, and then the next shift would be 7 to 3. So you would do 2 weeks of 7 to 3, and then you may rotate, and then you go on to the 3 to 11 shift. So you're rotating around, and then that way, a lot of businesses may just want to have their companies running 24/7. But another benefit of it is that you don't have people that are working, doing the day sleeping constantly. It rotates amongst all the employees. The next section of the texts talks about sleep and dreaming. And these are the 7 to count. And so these are the main 7 areas. So again, what I've done is I've broken it into the 7 and I've pulled out the important information out of each. And hopefully this makes it a little more organized and easier for you to study. So first we're going to talk about stages of sleep. Stages of sleep. So we spend approximately a third of our lives asleep, which is quite a bit. And as we're sleeping, we cycle through stages roughly every 90 minutes, and we're going to get more into that in the next couple of slides. So throughout those cycles, our brain activity and other physiological responses change. We have beta waves and alpha waves. Okay, so beta waves occur when we're awake and alert. So somehow you can remember beta being awake, alert, whereas alpha waves occur when we're relaxed and drowsy. So this graph shows a record of a typical night's sleep. And as I said, the rotation, the cycles are about 90 minutes, and people typically go through 4 or 5 REM periods, rapid eye movement periods during the night. During the beginning of the sleep, we spend more times in the deepest stages of sleep, and then as it goes after a few hours, as it goes further and further, we spend less time in REM sleep, which is the deepest stage. So let's just start in the upper left corner here. So you start out relaxed and drowsy, okay, and this is the stage 1. It lasts just a few minutes, theta 3.5 to 7.5, and body jerks. Those numbers, honestly, you're just going to have to memorize the ranges roughly, right? So stage 1 just lasts a few minutes, and then you're going to pass into stage 2, which sleep deepens and you're a little bit more relaxed. Sleep spindles about 1 to 2 seconds and bursts of rapid brain activity. Stage 3, sleep deepens again and delta waves appear. And then stage 4, sleep deepens again and delta waves dominate the pattern. You'll see down there beyond stage 4 where dreams occur, and the eye movement, the rapid eye movement, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So during the REM sleep, there's a high level of arousal and frequent dreaming. Physiological changes, your heart rate increases, your breathing becomes a little bit more rapid and irregular, brainwave activity increases, REM sleep paralysis. So basically it's what that means is difficulty for voluntary muscles to contract. So once you go through all of the stages down to stage 4, then you start to come back up stage 3, stage 2, stage 1 again, and then you come back down. And you do this typically around 6 times a night. Okay, the next section, brain and environment. So we're talking about REM sleep, in the state of being in REM sleep, right? That deep, deep sleep that we all like to be in. And when you're younger, you spend more time in REM sleep, and as you get older, you spend less time in REM sleep. That's possibly why you hear about people having, when people get older, sleeping less and having less restful sleep and being more tired. So there's no one sleep center in the brain. Okay, whereas, there's certain centers that specialize in different functions in the brain. There is not one sleep center. So all the different sleep cycles are controlled by different parts of the brain. Going to sleep, it's not just about turning off your brain. Your brain doesn't turn off and you fall asleep. Some places turn off or turn down, but other systems turn on sleep to actively promote sleep. So areas at the base of the forebrain, called the basal forebrain, they're important for regulating the falling of asleep. Another area of the brain stem where the reticular formation passes through contains REM sleep-on neurons, so to say. They activate other systems that control eye movements, muscular paralysis, genital arousal. As we talked about earlier, sleep is biologically regulated, but the environment also plays a role. Okay, so for example, the change of seasons, winter and fall. During winter and fall, most people sleep between 15 minutes to 1 hour longer per night than they do in the summertime. Much of this will have to do with vitamin D, which we get from sunlight. This is important for serotonin production, and serotonin is important for many sleep functions, including the sleep-wake cycle. How much do we sleep? Well, there's an interesting chart on page 204, a study where they looked at the total number of hours across infancy, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and old age. And they also looked at their REM sleep versus non-REM sleep. I suggest you take a look at that chart. It's very interesting, actually. So newborn infants, they average about 16 hours of sleep a day, and almost half of that time is spent in that very, very deep REM sleep. Okay. As you get older, of course, three changes happen. So we sleep less. So instead of sleeping 16 hours a day, we sleep more, about 8. Youth between the ages of 15 and 24, which I imagine many of you are, should be sleeping 8.5 hours a night. Probably not, but you should be for optimal performance at school. Whereas elderly, as we get older, we sleep less, and elderly people sleep actually less than 6 hours a night. That's possibly why we see elderly people, out for walks and up and doing things at 6 a.m. because they're wide awake. REM sleep decreases dramatically during infancy and then levels off. I seem to be missing a word there. So anyways, if you look on that chart, 50, 40, 20 to 25, 30% of the time during infancy spent in REM sleep. And then as time goes on and as they get older, that pink section that signifies the REM sleep, it gets thinner and thinner and then levels off, I guess, after the age of, after childhood. I would have thought that's been older. And the third change is that time in stages 3 and 4, that's what that means, stages 3 and 4 declines. So by late adulthoods, there's little slow wave. Okay, so the 3 changes to remember: we sleep less as we get older. REM sleep decreases dramatically during infancy. So babies spend, like I said, 16 hours a day in sleep, and most of that time is REM. And after infancy, in childhood and on, that sort of evens out to around 20 to 22%. And then again, time in stage 3 and stage 4 of sleep declines. And by late adulthood, there's very little slow wave. Very little slow wave sleep. Sleep deprivation. Psychologists study sleep deprivation to gain insight into why we need sleep. Right? So Pilcher and Huffcutt, 1996 meta-analysis, they were looking at 19 sleep deprivation studies. I've done it this way. I've laid out this chart because when texts go into a lot of detail about a study and it seems overwhelming and you're thinking, oh gosh, how am I going to remember all of this? This is how I break it down, that it's easy to study after. You're welcome to give it a try. So basically what they did, they had 3 different groups. They had one group that was called the short-term deprivation group, and they got greater than 45 hours of sleep deprivation. Long-term deprivation, 45 hours plus, and partial deprivation is less than 5 hours a night. Now, these categories are rather broad because, like I said, they're looking at 19 different sleep deprivation studies, right? So they've created these 3 groups. What they measured was self-reported mood in terms of irritability and disorientation. They measured responses on mental tasks, and they measured responses on physical tasks. So they took the results, they combined them across all of the groups. The average sleep deprived person performed as the same as the person in the bottom 9% of non-deprived. What does that mean? Okay, so basically what they're saying is that if people who are not non-deprived, they're sleeping regularly. Okay, a normal group of people sleeping regularly. What this study found is that the average sleep deprived person performed in the bottom 9% of people who sleep regularly on these tasks when they measured their mood, their cognitive, and their physical. Okay, so basically, if you're sleep deprived, you're doing some pretty low low cognitive functioning, physical, and mood. So all three types of, all of the three groups, let's go back here. The short-term deprived, which is greater than 45 hours of sleep deprivation. They hadn't slept in 45 hours. Long-term deprived, 45 hours, and partial. All three of these groups had suffered a negative effect on the functioning. The mood had the worst effect. Okay, so if you're going to rank these, mood had the worst effect, cognitive abilities had the second worst effect, and then physical had somewhat impairment. And it's important to notice that all of the groups had significant impairment across all three of them from a regular control group of people who were sleeping regularly. Sleep deprivation is also associated with other health problems, for example, type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance. It's associated with high blood pressure, headaches, stomach aches, increased allergic reactions, and basically a lower health-related quality of life, lower altogether. It also notes that sleep deprivation, they used to have it in the Guinness Book of World Records, and people were, fighting for who could stay up the longest to get into the Guinness Book of World Records, and they actually removed it as a category because it is so dangerous for people to go to sleep, to go without sleep for so long. There's a really interesting read. It's on page 206, goes across to 207, which talks about how to have a good night's sleep. Okay, so this slide here has all the tips from that reading. I'm not going to go over all of it. You can look at that yourselves in the textbook. This video is hitting 27 minutes, and I've had requests to keep them shorter, so we're going to move on. Why do we sleep? The text talks about the restoration model, about how sleep recharges our bodies when they're run down. Basically, sleep allows us to recover from physical and mental fatigue. So what is the support for this? There was a study that talks about that activities that increase daily wear and tear on the body should increase sleep.
Mom or Nana?
That's my mom calling. And as I'm not editing these videos, I'm leaving that in there too. So basically the premise is that if sleep is supposed to allow us to recharge our bodies, right, and recover from physical and mental fatigue, then activities that increase our wear and tear on our bodies should make us sleep longer, right? If that's true. And when they looked at marathon runners, they found that the day after a marathon where they're running, 80 kilometers, whatever it is that they're doing, 200, the marathon runners slept longer, much, much longer, and they had increased percentage of their time in slow wave deep sleep after the marathon. What gets restored? Like, what exactly is it that gets restored? They talk about adenosine, which is a cellular waste product. So basically, when you're working out your muscles in your body, adenosine gets released. It's produced when the body burns fuel, and then as adenosine accumulates, it gets built up and built up in the body. It signals the brain to slow down because too much cellular fuel is being burned. Second last, why do we sleep? The text gets into talking about evolutionary and circadian models, about how sleep is adaptive, and how our sleep-wake patterns, it evolved over time because it increases our chance of survival, right? It's a mechanism for conserving energy, metabolic rate, 10 to 25% slower during sleep. And then it starts to discuss restoration and evolutionary theory. Restoration and evolutionary theories. contribute to two-factor model of sleep. The last section is talking about sleep disorders. I'm not going to go through all of them. What I have done is created slides for you that goes through all the different sleep disorders. Okay, so there we have insomnia, narcolepsy, a dog who suffers from narcolepsy, REM sleep behavior disorder, sleep apnea, talks about sleepwalking, nightmares, night terrors, and then just a last section on the nature of dreams. Okay, we've hit 30 minutes now. It's time for me to sign off. I hope this video has been helpful. The rest of the slides, you can go through those as you read through the chapter. Again, you're responsible for all the information in the chapter, not just the stuff in the slides, but I've created these to make it easier and to support your learning. Okay, I will see you in the next video.